The envelope was thin, the kind that slides between junk mail and goes straight to the trash. I almost let it. I was standing at the kitchen counter in my house in Katy, Texas, still in my work boots, mail in one hand, a glass of water in the other, and I nearly threw the whole stack away without opening a single piece. But something made me stop. The return address read Lone Star Energy Services. That stopped me cold. Darnell hadn't lived at the Sycamore Hill property for 19 months. My son, Darnell Eugene Carver, died on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 19 months ago, when his truck drifted off Farm Road 1093 near the Brazos River bottoms and struck a stand of post oaks so hard the engine ended up in the front seat. The Harris County Sheriff's Office called it a single vehicle accident. Fatigue, high speed, no skid marks, no witnesses. I signed the papers they put in front of me because I had no reason not to. Darnell worked long days. He drove that road twice a week. I was a man who had just buried his only child, and I was not in a position to question anything. That was then. I stood at my kitchen counter and I opened the envelope. The total due was $609, 942 kilowatt hours. I read the account summary 3 times. Then I read the 2 words printed beneath the usage breakdown, the 2 words that made the hair on my arms stand up. Active occupancy. The property had been empty for 19 months. I need you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a dramatic man. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural inspector for Harris County. I have seen bridges fail and buildings crack and flood walls give way, and in every one of those situations I did the same thing. I got quiet, I got methodical, and I found the truth. That is what I did the night I opened that envelope. I didn't call anyone. I didn't yell. I put on a fresh shirt, walked to my truck, and I drove. The Sycamore Hill property sat 52 miles northwest of Katy, just off FM 1093, in a wide-open stretch of Fort Bend County, where the land goes flat and the sky gets enormous, and you can see weather coming from 40 miles away. Darnell had bought it 4 years ago with money his mother left him. Denise, my wife, had died of a brain aneurysm 3 years before that, quick, without warning. The way some deaths happen, as if God ran out of time for a longer goodbye. She left Darnell $180,000. Every dollar she'd ever saved teaching 3rd grade in Alief ISD. He used it to buy 11 acres, a 2-story house that needed work, a metal barn, and a piece of Texas that he swore he was going to turn into something. He did turn it into something. That's the part that still gets me. I made the drive in just under an hour. It was past 8 in the evening. The sun was gone, but the horizon still held a pale orange line where the heat of the day refused to quit. I turned off FM 1093 onto the county road that cuts north through the property, and I slowed down before I reached the driveway. The lights were on. Not one lamp left running by accident. Every window on the first floor was lit. I could see the blue flicker of a television through the front curtain. And parked in the gravel where Darnell's truck used to sit was a pearl-white Chevrolet Tahoe with a Travis County plate I'd never seen in my life. I didn't get out of my truck. I sat there with the engine running for 4 minutes, watching. Smoke came from the chimney in September, in Texas heat. Someone had a fire going inside my son's house. I reached for the door handle twice. Both times I stopped myself. Whoever was inside that house had no idea I was 50 yards away in the dark. I wanted to keep it that way, because before I walked up to that door and knocked, I needed to know exactly what I was walking into. I remembered something. About a year before Darnell died, he'd installed a security camera system. 4 cameras, cloud-connected, motion-triggered. He'd shown me the app on his phone one Sunday afternoon. He gave me the login because Darnell was that kind of man, careful, thorough. The kind of man who thought 3 steps ahead and wanted someone he trusted to have access to everything he built. I'd never used it. I'd told myself there was no reason to. 19 months later, sitting in my truck in the dark with my dead son's house, lit up like someone was hosting a dinner party, I had every reason. I put the truck in reverse and drove back toward Katy. The whole drive home, I kept seeing those lights. I kept seeing that Tahoe in the gravel. I kept thinking about Darnell's ex-wife, his widow. I had to remind myself to say widow, a woman named Celestine. She had stood beside his casket in a black dress and wept through the entire service. She had held my hand outside the funeral home and told me she couldn't bring herself to go back to Sycamore Hill. Too much pain, she'd said. Too many memories. I had believed her because she was crying and because my son was gone and because grief makes you extend grace you might not otherwise give. I got home at 10:17. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and logged into the camera system for the first time since Darnell had set up my account. 81 motion-triggered clips were waiting for me. I want you to understand what the next several hours felt like. I want you to understand, because if you have ever sat alone in a quiet house in the middle of the night and watched something that rewrote everything you thought you knew about your own life, then you know. And if you haven't, I hope to God you never do. I started with clip 1, November 4th, 3 weeks after the funeral. Celestine's white Tahoe pulled into the driveway. She got out, unlocked the front door with a key she was not supposed to have, and went inside. She stayed 2 days. She looked tired. I wanted to believe she was grieving. I almost did. Then came clip 12. December 19th, 7 weeks after Darnell died, a black Ford F-250 with running lights pulled in beside the Tahoe. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, maybe 6'1", big through the shoulders, close-cropped beard going gray at the jaw. He had a tattoo on his right forearm, dark geometric ink that ran from his wrist to his elbow. He walked to the porch. Before he reached the steps, the front door opened, and Celestine came out. She walked straight to him and kissed him on the mouth the way people kiss when they've been waiting. I watched that clip 3 times. Then I kept going. Clips 13 through 35 covered December through February. The man I didn't know his name yet brought boxes. Celestine brought boxes. They repainted the front porch trim from the dark green Darnell had chosen to a pale gray that Celestine apparently preferred. They installed a new mailbox with initials on it that weren't mine or Darnell's. In February, a landscaping crew showed up and pulled out the native grasses Darnell had planted along the fence line and replaced them with street. Augustine sod and decorative stone. Clip 41. A horse trailer. Clip 42. A bay mare being led into the barn my son had rebuilt board by board. Clip 51. The 2 of them sitting on Darnell's porch swing at sunset, drinking wine, laughing at something I couldn't hear. I watched all 81 clips. It took me most of the night. By the time the last clip ended, the sky outside my kitchen window was going pink. I had not slept. I had not eaten. My coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago. I sat in the gray morning light, and I looked at the frozen image on my screen, Celestine, and the man standing in front of Darnell's barn, her hand in his, both of them squinting against the afternoon sun like a couple who owned the place. Because she believed she did. Here is what I want to say to you directly. I am a man who measures things. I don't cry easily. I didn't cry when Denise died, not in public. I held it together because someone had to. I didn't cry at Darnell's funeral. I cried once, alone, in the parking lot of a Whataburger on the way home from the cemetery, and then I stopped and drove home. But sitting at that kitchen table at 6 in the morning, watching my dead son get erased frame by frame, that broke something in me that I don't have the right word for. Not just grief, something colder, something that had to be handled. I saved every clip to a flash drive. Then I backed everything up to a second cloud account. Then I called my attorney. His name is Raymond. He's been practicing estate law in Houston for 22 years. We'd worked together when Denise died, when we set up Darnell's education account, when Darnell had me witness his will. Raymond picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. There was a long silence when I finished. Then he said, "Come to my office at 8 o'clock. Bring the drive, the utility bill, and a copy of Darnell's will. Don't contact Celestine. Don't go back to the property. Don't do anything until we talk." Raymond's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Westheimer. By the time I got there, I'd been awake for 30 hours. Raymond sat across from me in a gray suit, watching the clips on his laptop without speaking. When clip 12 played the kiss on the porch, his jaw tightened. He didn't say anything. He just kept watching. When it was over, he leaned back and took off his glasses. "The property is Darnell's separate property," he said, "purchased before the marriage with inheritance funds. Under Texas law, that's his alone. It doesn't pass to her automatically. It goes to his designated beneficiary, which is you." He folded his hands. "She knows that. Which means she's been living there knowing she has no legal right to any of it." I asked what we could do. He told me 3 things. Investigate the finances, identify the man in the videos, and file in probate court. He said it would take time. He said Celestine would fight back. He said I needed to be patient and I needed to stay away from the property. I told him I understood. I almost kept that promise. 2 weeks later, Raymond called with the first set of findings. I want to sit with this for a moment before I tell you, because I need you to understand the weight of what I'm about to say. You might think after 19 months of loss, after watching those clips, after understanding that your daughter-in-law had moved her boyfriend into your dead son's home, you might think nothing else could hit you harder. You would be wrong. Darnell had a life insurance policy. He'd taken it out 6 years ago, shortly after Denise died. The original coverage was $300,000. The beneficiary was me. That's what I knew. What I didn't know, what Raymond discovered when he contacted the insurance company, was that 8 months before Darnell died, the policy had been amended. The coverage had been increased to $850,000. And the beneficiary had been changed from me to Celestine. The authorization form bore my signature. I never signed that form. Raymond hired a forensic document examiner named Dr. Paula Westbrook, who compared the signature on the authorization form to my notarized signature from 3 other legal documents. Her conclusion was unambiguous. The signature was a forgery. The pressure was wrong. The letter spacing was wrong. Whoever had forged it had studied my handwriting but hadn't understood how I held a pen. Small detail, enormous consequence. Celestine had forged my signature, increased Darnell's policy to $850,000, made herself the sole beneficiary, and collected the full amount 17 days after his funeral. $850,000. 17 days. I'm going to ask you something. Have you ever been in a room or a moment where the truth arrives so large that your body doesn't know what to do with it? Where you understand something in your bones before your mind has finished processing it? That's where I was standing when Raymond told me those numbers. I was in his office. The afternoon sun was coming through the blinds in long stripes across the carpet. I remember thinking, she was crying at the funeral. I remember thinking, she held my hand. I remember thinking, she told me she couldn't go back. She had cashed the check before the burial flowers wilted. There's more, there always is, in these stories, and I'm sorry for that. I truly am, but I need to keep going because what Raymond found next is what changed this from a fraud case into something else entirely. He brought in a digital forensics specialist, a woman named Dr. Fiona Tran, who had spent 12 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit before going private. She took Darnell's laptop and his phone and she did what she does. She found what had been deleted, and she reconstructed what had been hidden. The first thing she found was a social media photograph. It was posted to Celestine's Instagram account on March 8th, 20 months before Darnell died. The image showed Celestine and the man from the videos standing together at an outdoor festival in Austin, his arm around her waist, her leaning into him, both of them smiling. The caption read simply, "Good things." The account had been deactivated after Darnell's death, but the cash remained. 20 months before he died, she had been with this man for 20 months before Darnell was gone. The second thing Dr. Tran found was worse. She recovered deleted text messages from a cloud backup linked to Darnell's phone. Messages he never knew existed. Messages between Celestine and a man whose name I now learned was Marcus Bellard, 43 years old, commercial contractor, Austin, Texas, the man with the geometric tattoo and the black F-250. The messages had been deleted from the active thread but preserved in the backup server. Dr. Tran read them to Raymond, and Raymond read them to me. September 2nd, 22 months before Darnell's death. Celestine, he is never going to be the man I need him to be. The ranch is his whole world. I am just something that lives in it. Marcus, then let's build our own. April 14th, 8 months before the accident. Celestine, I changed the policy. $850. If something happens, we're fine. Marcus, you are something else. I mean that. October 2nd, 12 days before Darnell died. Celestine, I'm working on the timing. Marcus, don't wait too long. Celestine, I won't. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table in Katy, and I thought about a Tuesday afternoon in October, about a county road near the Brazos River bottoms, about a truck that drifted at high speed without braking. I thought about my son who worked long days, who drove that road twice a week, who had no reason to fall asleep at 2:30 in the afternoon, and I thought about 12 days. I'm working on the timing. 12 days. Don't wait too long. 10 days. I won't. 2 days. His truck left the road. The neighbor's name was Ruth Ellen Vance. She was 71 years old, retired schoolteacher, lived a half-mile down the county road from Sycamore Hill on a property she'd owned for 30 years. Raymond had a private investigator reach out to her after we found the text messages. She called me directly on a Thursday morning, her voice calm and specific. She said she had seen Marcus Bellard's black F-250 parked at Sycamore Hill on the morning of October 18th, 4 days after Darnell died, 2 days before the funeral. She had seen Celestine come out to meet him on the porch. She had watched him hold her. Not the way you hold someone who is grieving, but the way you hold someone you've been waiting to hold in the open for a long time. And she had noticed, because Ruth Ellen is the kind of woman who notices things, that Celestine was wearing a ring on her right hand. Wide silver band, turquoise setting, not her wedding ring. Raymond said, "That's our witness." I said, "Get her on the record." The probate hearing was in Fort Bend County. I sat behind Raymond at the petitioner's table and I watched Celestine walk in wearing a charcoal blazer and a look of practiced composure. She glanced at me once. I held her gaze until she looked away. The judge, a woman named Honorable Diane Osei, heard Raymond's opening argument, the forged signature, the $850,000, the fraudulent estate credit account Celestine had opened in Darnell's name to fund a $92,000 spending spree on a horse trailer, livestock, and home furnishings. She heard the forensic testimony. She heard Ruth Ellen Vance describe, calmly and in precise detail, what she had seen on October 18th, 2 days before my son was in the ground. Judge Osei didn't need long to decide. She denied Celestine's property transfer petition. She ordered the return of the insurance funds. She froze the estate accounts. She appointed an independent administrator. And she referred the matter to the Fort Bend County District Attorney for criminal investigation. Then she looked at Celestine and said, "You have 30 days to vacate the property." I thought it was over. I was wrong. Celestine filed an appeal the next morning. She filed a temporary restraining order claiming I had unlawfully surveilled her. Her attorney argued the cameras were an invasion of privacy. My attorney argued that Darnell had installed the cameras on his own property, given me the login himself, and that Celestine had lived under them for 19 months without ever attempting to disable them. The appellate court denied her appeal unanimously. The TRO was dismissed in 8 minutes. Still, she didn't leave. On a Thursday night, 3 weeks after the ruling, I got a motion alert on my phone. Camera 2, front driveway. I opened the app. Marcus Bellard's F-250 was pulling up to the house. He stepped out with a beer bottle in one hand and walked toward the porch like he was home. And something in me, something I should have controlled, said, "Enough." I drove to Sycamore Hill. I want to be honest with you about this. Raymond had told me not to go. He had told me specifically, clearly, more than once, to stay away from that property and let the law handle it. And he was right. I knew he was right. But I am a 64-year-old man who had spent 19 months watching his son get erased from the property, from the future, maybe from this earth by deliberate hands, and there are limits to how long a father can be told to wait. Before I left my driveway, I opened my voice recorder app and pressed record. Then I slid the phone into my shirt pocket, microphone out. I parked in the dark at the edge of the gravel and walked toward the house. Marcus stepped onto the porch before I made it halfway across the yard. He folded his arms and looked at me like I was a minor inconvenience. "You're trespassing," he said. I told him the court had ruled. I told him he had days, not weeks. He smiled. He came down the steps slowly, the way men do when they want you to notice how much bigger they are. He stopped close enough that I could smell him. "Celestine's not leaving," he said. "And neither am I." I told him the sheriff would come. He leaned in. His voice went low and quiet, the way voices do when someone wants to be sure no one else hears. "You know what happened to your son on that county road?" he said. "That could have happened to anyone. Long drive, dark roads. Things get in the way." He held my gaze. "You're 64 years old. You drive these roads alone at night. Be careful." My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my hands. I took one step back, kept my voice flat. "What exactly are you telling me?" He shrugged. "I'm telling you accidents happen. Your boy proved that." And then something broke loose in him, the arrogance, the contempt, the absolute certainty that I was nothing, that I couldn't touch him, that he had already won. He took a step toward me. "You want the truth? Your son was in the way. Celestine and I had been together 2 years before he died. She did what needed doing. And that insurance money?" He grinned. "That was always ours. I didn't move. I didn't swing. I didn't yell. I reached into my shirt pocket, took out my phone, and turned the screen toward him so he could see the red recording light blinking in the dark. His face changed. He lunged. I ran. I am 64 years old and I ran across that gravel yard in the dark and I got to my truck and I locked it and I backed down the driveway before he reached me. He stood in my headlights with his chest heaving, watching me go. I pulled on to FM 1093. I pulled over. I pressed play. His voice came through the speaker clear as a confession. "Your son was in the way. Celestine did what needed doing. That insurance money was always ours." I called Raymond. Then I called the Fort Bend County District Attorney's tip line. Then I drove to the Harris County Sheriff's substation on Highway 6, and I walked in at 12:40 in the morning, and I placed my phone on the counter and I said, "My son was murdered. I have a confession. Here it is." Marcus Bellard was arrested 48 hours later. Celestine, and here is where the story almost breaks me. Every time I tell it, Celestine ran. Her phone went dark. Her credit cards went quiet. She made it all the way to Laredo before a state trooper found her white Tahoe at a motor inn off I-35. registered under a name that wasn't hers, with $11,000 in cash and a fake Mexican passport in the nightstand. She was 16 miles from the border. She called me from the motel before they found her. Unknown number. Late on a Wednesday night. "Gerald," she said. She always called me Gerald, and hearing her say my name felt like being touched by something I needed to wash off. "I want to make a deal." I hit record. She offered to plead guilty to fraud. She offered to give back the property. She said she would disappear and I would never hear from her again. All I had to do was tell the DA that Marcus had made the whole thing up, that his recording was out of context, that Darnell's death was an accident and always had been. I listened to every word. Then I said, "The toxicology results came back, Celestine." She went very quiet. The autopsy, court-ordered after Marcus's arrest, had found zolpidem in Darnell's tissue, twice the maximum therapeutic dose. He had no prescription, no history of sleep disorders, no reason to have a sedative dissolved in his system on a Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Keisha Morales, the forensic toxicologist who testified in the criminal trial 4 months later, was clear. At that concentration, unconsciousness was not a possibility. It was a certainty. The crash was not an accident. It was a scheduled event. Celestine hung up. The recording ran 8 minutes and 40 seconds. I emailed it to Raymond, to the DA, and to the lead detective within 4 minutes of the call ending. Celestine was arrested at the Laredo Motel at 4:47 a.m. She did not resist. She stood in the doorway in jeans and a gray sweatshirt and let the officers cuff her. A witness at the scene later said she looked relieved. I believe that. I think she had been carrying the weight of what she'd done for a long time, and some part of her was glad to put it down. The trial lasted 11 days. Marcus testified against her under a plea agreement. Dr. Morales testified about the zolpidem. Ruth Ellen Vance testified about October 18th. Dr. Tran testified about the deleted texts. Raymond presented the forged insurance form, the fraudulent estate account, the 81 camera clips. I testified for 40 minutes. I was calm. I had practiced being calm. Celestine testified against her attorney's advice. She claimed the recordings were edited. She claimed Marcus was lying. She accused the jury and then the judge of prejudice. Judge Osei called a recess. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. Guilty, deliberate homicide, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, flight, life without parole, 22 years consecutive for the financial crimes. Marcus received 20 years under his cooperation agreement. I drove to Sycamore Hill the morning after sentencing. I unlocked the front door with my own key, the one Darnell had made for me 4 years ago, and I walked through every room. I repainted the porch trim dark green. I reinstalled the mailbox Darnell had put up the spring before he died. I spent a Saturday cleaning out the barn. I spent a Sunday relearning the property lines, walking the fence, checking the gates, the way Darnell and I used to do together on his weekends home. I kept the cameras. Some mornings now I drive out from Katy before dawn and I arrive at Sycamore Hill as the sun comes up over the flat Texas horizon, and I stand on the porch with a cup of coffee and a photograph I keep on the windowsill. Darnell at 31, standing in front of the barn, holding a drill, grinning because he had just finished something and everything was still good. I talk to that photograph sometimes. I tell him about the trial. I tell him the property is his again, in every way that matters. I tell him I'm sorry it took me 19 months and a utility bill to understand what had happened. I tell him I'm still here, and I'll keep telling him that, for as long as I'm standing. Here is what this taught me, not as a lesson I'm handing you, but as a truth I earned. Grief makes you want to believe the best of people. It makes you want every crying face at a funeral to be genuine, because the alternative is too dark to consider. That instinct is human, and it is good. But it can be exploited. It was exploited in my case by someone who had been planning her exit long before the exit arrived. The one thing I did right, the one thing that saved everything Darnell had built, was that I didn't throw away that utility bill. Pay attention to the small things that don't add up. Trust what you know against what you're being told. And if something feels wrong, not dramatically wrong, just quietly, consistently wrong, don't wait 19 months to find out why. I want to ask you something before you go. If you had been standing in that driveway in the dark, phone recording in your pocket, and that man said what he said, would you have stayed calm? Be honest with yourself. I want you to drop a comment and tell me. Would you have run, or would you have stood your ground? And while you're there, tell me where you're watching, from what city, what time of day. I read every one of those comments, every single one. If you have ever lost someone and felt in the back of your mind that something about the story you were told didn't quite fit, this story is for you. You're not crazy. You're not paranoid. You are paying attention, and that matters. If this reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. subscribe so you're here for the next one. These stories take a long time to tell right, and I'm not going to rush them. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in the Houston, Texas area to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, events, or institutions is entirely coincidental.